Hey, Joe.
Hey, Mom.
So this month we're talking about love, and we had the joy of including my 77-year-old mom and 25-year-old son to join the conversation. We wanted to create a multi-generational space and dig deep into the experience of love.
Yeah, it was so great. We got to dig into the different forms and types of love, what we thought about the essence of love and the origins of those beliefs. We also got into social media and its impact on how younger generations experience love and kind of affects the way that they communicate and interact.
Yeah, at one point my son Brendan made the comment that the future looks dire. It was really great to see how just through this one conversation we had, we were able to come around to a super hopeful view of the future.
Yeah, that's what I love about this podcast is how without preaching at people or going to conversations with motives to change their ideas, we can just show up for each other, and we're becoming home for each other one conversation at a time through asking questions, through showing up and just being super genuine and finding common ground.
Yeah, I mean, my mom grew up in a super different time, and she's formed her own beliefs through her experiences, and honestly a lot of them clash with different perspectives of the younger generations. And I had a couple concerns leading into this conversation that there would be so much tension that something could erupt, but it was so beautiful to be part of a 2-hour moment in time where these differing opinions and experiences and perspectives could just be shared and respected. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely, it was. It is super important that this series of episodes is listened to or watched on YouTube, just in order, because the conversation really does grow and build on the foundation of each previous idea and conversation that we have. So for our listeners, please make sure that you start with Love Part 1 and work your way through the conversation in order, just to really understand our heart behind what each person is sharing.
For sure. All right, now let's get into it. And I think about love. You have to have hope in love. Love as a thing in and of itself must have hope. Otherwise you wouldn't be willing to make the risk or the sacrifice, or going back to the things that we've been talking about this whole time. We wouldn't be willing to enter into the potential pain of love gone wrong, or love ending, or love changing, and I still think this might be another conversation, but I get kind of tripped up in this conversation when we say things like I just said, because I feel like in and of itself, love by itself is a pure thing. And it's everlasting. I personally believe that love is the thing that is the fabric of the universe. I don't think there would be a thing in existence outside of the energy of love. And so we learn to live and move and navigate and shift and change because situations change, relationships change, feelings change. I don't think those are the things that is the essence of love.
Yeah.
I feel like we do things that are loving. We do things that reflect love at times, but also we do things that don't reflect love. And so in that moment, we've maybe stepped out of the purity and the essence of love. But it's kind of like the yin yang thing for me. Again, it's like, maybe we're in the big bubble of love, even though there's some little experiences that we're having that don't feel very loving or feel, unicorns and rainbows. Like I don't have fairy dust blowing out of my butthole like the whole time. You know what I'm saying? It's not real life, right? That's just not what we experience. So it's a thing, Don't you remember the old cartoons, Brendan, that we used to watch where there's fairy dust? What was the one with the two fairies that you guys used to always watch?
The Fairly Odd Parents?
The Fairly Odd Parents. I just have a picture of them flying around with fairy dust coming out. Anyways, sorry. Totally derailed.
That was so great.
But, you brought up generational issues, Joe. And so as we kind of head into this last segment, I want to talk a little bit about, things that have been passed down. And this question about what role does trauma play in love, or vice versa, what role does love play in trauma? Because you mentioned, your generation, you and your sisters are kind of the first to step forward and say, hey, we've got trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to heal from that trauma in order to change the next generation. And so only love is going to do that work.
Yeah.
You're going to have to step into a deeper love for yourselves, for the situation, because love forgives, right?
Yeah.
And forgiveness is really an exercise first for ourselves to release ourselves
Yeah.
from bitterness and anger and torment. And the byproduct is potentially peace with the other person or the other party involved,
Perhaps,
or
yeah.
the memory or the whatever, but not always. So, I want to kind of hit a little bit on sort of that relationship between what role does love play as you're facing traumas and past experiences and things where love has not been defined well or has not been experienced in a healthy way or has not been defined very well. Mom, you brought up, that your dad was not there very much, it was kind of an absent thing. So, and just because I know you and your dad weren't that close. And so, the love level between you guys was maybe, I don't know, how would you describe it? I don't want to describe it for you, but and you mentioned your mom had some traumas. And so, there is this aspect of how we pass down to our children the things that we experienced. It just is part of what happens in a family when you are live together. So, can you talk a little bit about the role that love either has played in some of your healing, or maybe that you would want it to play, or I don't know. Do I need to say that in a different way? Is that confusing?
Well, when we were talking the other day, I think I told you that I thought I had some kind of a dissociative disorder. Um, and I say that because when my dad walked out the door, I had just graduated from high school. And he went directly from our home to Arizona to his girlfriend. And I really disassociated from him at that point. And I didn't have a desire to see him, excuse me, or meet her in all of the years that he was still alive.
Hmm.
And when he died, I really wasn't affected by his death because we had been separated for so long and he was rarely there when I grew up. So, in a way, when I look back at it now, I'm glad that we didn't have that relationship because it would have been extremely hurtful otherwise. Had I been close to my dad, that would have probably ripped me apart.
Mm.
But in his total absence, I grew closer to my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then going forward into my different relationships and the things that happened with those, I turned away from those when I was forced to, in some respects, turn away from those relationships. I poured my love into my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying I was a perfect parent. I was far from perfect. But I hope that my kids know that I always loved them and wanted the best for them and still do. And I consider today my kids are my best friends.
Mm-hmm.
They are my legacy. They are my world.
Mm.
That's what I have in life, are my kids.
I really like how you said that your kids are your best friend. That almost made me cry. I grew up um hearing, I think there's some truth to this in the moment, but I grew up hearing, I'm your mother, not your friend. And as an adult now, that's like one of the most painful things that I have. I feel like not, it's just one of the biggest statements I feel like that just got drilled in there. That was like, okay, I have this, this infrastructure of roles and how it goes. So like now I just have issues with authority in general, which is it's just now something I deal with. But to hear that your kids are your best friends, I think is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, because being able to have that relationship where you really just have camaraderie and companionship with your kids. And I know that, like, when they grow up, like, I get the idea, I'm your mother, not your friend. Like, you need to listen to me. I'm here to protect you. But it just wasn't communicated in love. So, like, being able to hear that side of it, of um, being able to be a mom and a friend simultaneously, I think is a really, really beautiful thing. Um, and something I would want to have, like, that's something I want to carry to my kids. Like I want to say my kids are my best friends. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I want to.
I want to be careful before we move on to hold your thought and come and don't forget it, Mom. But I do want to be careful to say that, it wasn't communicated to you in love, because I feel like maybe it's that we didn't hear it as loving, because, different people are at different places and can they only know how to communicate in the way that they know how, right? And it's not always the way, like for me, my dad, like I always had these expectations of my dad to be a certain way, and it wasn't until I got to know his parents that I realized my dad couldn't be those things. He didn't know how. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't raised that way. And so like that helped me give my dad buckets of grace, to be like, okay, it's possible that he was loving me the only way he knew how.
Yeah.
And so like to offer grace to, that generation or that experience or that person, that maybe they were trying to communicate it in love, or they had love behind it, they had a reason for doing it, it just didn't translate or something.
Yeah.
So just to honor
No, thank you for
your
saying
mom for a
that.
minute, because we all make mistakes as parents, like my mom said, we're far from perfect, and every parent makes their mistakes and does their things and leaves, we do something that leaves an impression on our kids that, we didn't mean it to be hurtful maybe, but we just didn't know any better, or we didn't have the understanding or the grace at the time to be able to communicate it in a way that was the healthiest or the best or whatever. So we all experience that as parents, and you guys aren't parents yet, B and Joe, but someday you will, and maybe someday you will be, and you'll have your stories in the end of the things that you did that were not good.
My kids will have to continue the podcast with what they had to go to therapy for.
Yeah. They're
Like,
gonna dish on all the trauma that you gave to them, Joelle, and so be careful.
My kids are gonna be like, my mom was so friendly, it was weird.
She was too free. Mom, do you remember your thought?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because my phone has to be put on the charger.
Yeah, we saw that you had a little issue there.
Um, my thought was when Joellen was talking, as a parent, I think my biggest mistake was treating my kids more like friends than being the parent. So I think while your kids are growing up, you need to be the parent. After they've grown, then you can become the friend.
It's hard to make that transition though. I'm like, I get what you're saying. And to be fair, you and Joellen's mom are more similar in age range than I am with her mom. But you know, I think that we're learning now in these new generations, the more we learn about mental health and healing and all those things, we're learning new ways to express friendship with our kids while maintaining, a healthy boundary that, like, look, you are a kid. Your brain is not even developed. Like, chill.
Brendan's brain just finished developing. Mine is still going.
Yeah. So, like, we have fully developed brains. Granted, we have trauma and all the things, and, hopefully we're dealing with that. But, we are the adult, and we are at the end of the day responsible for keeping you alive every single day. So,
no pressure.
We need to have balance here. But, so I think that we're starting to learn how to kind of create better scenarios where we can have a mix of the two, and kids. My hope is that what I see young people doing nowadays who are starting to have children, I see them becoming much more healthy in the way that they're raising their kids. Like, they're having more conversations, they're being more open, they're talking about sex, they're talking about real life situations and not shying away from the hard things.
Yeah.
Like, mom, like, you grew up in a time when parents didn't talk to their kids about that stuff.
Hey Mom, I'm having so much fun doing this podcast with you. Thank you so much for being open to the idea of a podcast. Just a project that is centered around vulnerable conversations and showing up for other people.
Yeah, it's a joy, and I'm so glad we live in a time where we can create content like this and hopefully bless someone who's looking to engage with other people on topics that really mean something to our human experience.
Absolutely. I know we invest a lot of time and money into creating the show, and we want our viewers to know that we are listener supported. So if this episode has been helpful or entertaining in some way, would you consider buying the show a coffee?
Yeah, it's a fun way to support the project and help us know that it blessed you. If buying a coffee, though, isn't something you can do right now, we'd love it if you would rate and share the show episodes on your own social media and help us reach more people.
Yes, we'd really appreciate all the prayers, good vibes, whether you buy us a coffee or share the content. We just want you to know we value you and your presence, and we can't wait to see where this project goes.
All right, check the show notes for links on how to buy us a coffee, but for now, let's get back to the conversation. You just don't. And you didn't talk to each other about that stuff, husband and wife. You didn't talk about sex and, like, hey, you suck at this. Can we get better? You know what I mean? Like, it just was not the culture. And I feel like the new culture really is, and Brendan, I'd love you to chime in here and see if you can kind of attest to this, but I do feel like the new culture is much more open and communicative than generations past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think the rise of, like, the internet and social media has also helped in that. It's also, like, it's connected just people and the younger generation, especially, for sure, because we've grew up with this. The generations past are kind of just, like, picking it up. Oh, what's this? Like, a lot of the younger ones are, like, have grown up with it, and so, like, they're as old as the internet in a lot of ways. So it's connected, these, like, millennials, Gen Z, younger, in a way that really hasn't happened before. So that a lot of conversations have been started on online, and so it's connected people a lot more. And so I feel like conversation and talking about things is mental health is talking about it is just a lot more louder. Everything's just more louder now. So I feel like that's definitely part of why we approach these conversations the way that we do. I don't think we're afraid of having these conversations anymore the way that people might have been, back then, because, I mean, we just see these conversations happening all the time. We are in these conversations all the time. So I think, and I mean, these younger generations are going to be exposed to these conversations really fast. You
If
know what
we
I
don't
mean?
talk about it, the internet will.
Right. I mean,
So let's talk about it and put it on the internet.
yeah,
Watch the Becoming Home podcast.
exactly. It's a full circle moment. Here we are. This is why we're here.
So,
Yeah.
Brendan, do you see that, like, do you see kids your age? I'm sorry, I don't mean to call you kids. Do you see young people your age, kind of dealing with their traumas more, and like what role is love? Do you see love playing a role in how they're kind of facing traumas or processing through traumas, that kind of thing? Or maybe are they trying to, like, I mean, everybody has trauma with their parents. You just do. Whether it's capital T trauma, little t trauma, complex, not complex, everybody does. So how do you see, are you guys more open about that with each other? And like, do you help each other process that? What role is love playing in that?
Absolutely. It's definitely something that is more, when you compare it to maybe like my grandmother's generation, it's something that's definitely talked about a lot more, which in and of itself is a big deal. But like, I'll have friends who will just openly, talk about how they go to therapy. I don't know if that was kind of a conversation that friends would really have before. You guys could tell me, but that's something that my friends will tell me, and I'll just tell my friends, talk about how uh therapy, maybe they're taking meds for something, we'll just talk about that. There's a little bit, everyone has their own, maybe their own like comfort level with some of those things, but on average it's
Sure.
definitely something that's
More
like
open.
talked about more for sure. So, and maybe some mental health like disorders like ADHD. People will talk about that, like, yeah, I got it, but it's whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's just these things, I guess, are not as viewed as like
Taboo.
a taboo, not as negatively viewed upon. I mean, it's just more accepted, I think. And I feel like the younger generation is a lot more accepting of people who are different than themselves,
Yeah.
whether that has to do with race or sexual orientation or whatever job they're working. I feel like we're a very accepting kind of a generation. So, and want, what I want you to do what's best for you and me to do what's best for me, type of a deal. So, and pretty compassionate about people around the world, people maybe who are in different situations. So I think those are all great things. But I do think the rise of the internet and social media has also like just caused a bunch of new issues with mental health. I feel like I go into I'm trailing off. What was the question again?
You're exactly there. You're
Me
exactly in the right
me
place.
personally, I do got that ADHD thing. So yeah, so I'll just
No,
go on.
you have
I'll
not
just
gone
follow
off
this
track at
rabbit
all.
and just
No.
go down.
You've not gotten off
Next thing
track
I
at
know,
all.
I'm in Wonderland. So
we were talking, you were talking right on the question, which was like, are young people really confronting their traumas and showing up for each other in love? And yeah, so you were right there.
yeah,
No worries.
yeah, it's definitely a conversation that friends have with each other some more. Whether or not they like successfully, I guess, deal with it or come out on the other side of it, I couldn't say on average what the success rate is, but
Too
I
early
feel
to
like I feel like there's definitely a lot more support than before, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I am seeing a lot more even just ads on social media for like even just therapy ads. Sorry, therapy apps where you can like download something and talk to a therapist. And a lot of these things are free even, where you just download it and you start texting with the therapist. And it's crazy that how like
Okay, but is it Chat GPT or like is it AI?
I don't want to know. I go to therapy and I
I'm
pay
so
for it.
suspicious. Let me get my tin hat. Hang on.
Yeah. I don't know. I've heard a lot of good things about some of those things. I'm sure some of it is paid for. But and hopefully the things that are paid for are real. But I'm seeing more and more of those like health awareness things that I'm sure like couldn't have been talked about. Like, I've never heard of an ad for a therapist in a newspaper in my entire life. Never heard of that.
I mean, have you read a lot of newspapers?
Not a lot,
Honestly? Like,
but like,
is that a fair thing to
what I've
say?
heard about being in, no, it's absolutely fair. What I hear about being in newspapers are like, comics, obviously. I did read that. And having like, news articles. It's like the social media where you
Yeah.
can find news and all the things. You can find all the things. But it's just cool that like maybe it's because I'm talking about it right by my phone, but I see all the therapy ads that kind of come through. I'm like, oh, we can talk about this like so easily, and it's not like it's just so cool. Like and like obviously they're trying to get you to buy into whatever they're selling, and they're like,
Sure.
ooh, do you have mental health problems? I'm like, that's a forward question. I'm like, oh, it's a therapy ad, whatever. But like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just cool that those things are talked about so much to where people are like, ooh, we can get people to spend money on that. Like,
Mhm.
kind of cool.
It's a topic
Double-edged
that
sword.
I guess it's a topic that people really can't ignore anymore because it's too big now.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that I guess when these generations get their hands on phones and start telling the world about how they feel or these experiences, and then everyone, oh yeah, I feel that way too. Let me share my experience. And there's enough of it, then business people and the other older generations can't ignore it, so they got to address it and talk about it. And
Cat's
so
out of
it's
the
kind of
bag,
like
man.
it's how it works. Yeah.
It makes me wonder a little bit too if this is almost a cyclical thing that we're just not aware of because like we haven't had social media in the past, but like so Brendan and I are like kind of like 2 generations, I think, away from a war, a major war. We're like for grandma, like her brother was off fighting in the war. I had an uncle that was, or a great uncle that was killed in the war. My grandpa was in the war. So, like, my grandpa was gone for a whole year from my grandma. And when they talk about like the worst part of their marriage, that's what they talk about, that year of being apart. They have never been separated since, ever. And like, obviously, he would go to work when he came back, but like, they never leave each other's side, which is precious. But we're 2 generations away from a war, and now all these mental health things are kind of coming forward. We're like, wow, there was a lot going on, which I just kind of it just makes me wonder if it's kind of a cyclical thing where people are where like a major worldwide either war or catastrophe or kind of a thing happens, and then a couple generations later, after the rubble has kind of settled, because when there's a war, you don't, I mean, I wouldn't know. I've never been alive during a major world war, but I assume that there's not time to really think about therapy and how's my mental health. But is my country going to continue to be free? Am I going to continue to have food on my table? Is my husband going to be alive while he's overseas? Rather than, and now a couple generations later, now that everything's kind of cleared down, now there's a lot of things coming up where like, oh, I have kind of met these mental health problems, or oh, there's these generational traumas that are coming up. And it just makes me wonder, like, has this happened before? And this is the biggest it's ever been because of social media.
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a great question about what role does social media play in mental health and, love and how love can impact or heal, some of these traumas. Because I mean, I feel like every generation has their version of war, like our kids that weren't able to go to school because the whole world shut down during,
COVID.
COVID. Like, I don't want to get flagged for saying it, but
Sorry.
it was a time in our world, our whole world, when everything shut down, and they are discovering a lot of new mental health issues in kids that are going back to school. Now they're back with the professionals and the teachers and the mental health professionals, that they're seeing a lot of massive impact from that. It's like they went through a type of war.
Why does everyone have social anxiety?
And I mean, I think social media has just become a moment in our world, in our history, where we're connected in a way, like Brendan was saying earlier, we're connected in a way like we've never been before. And so we're aware of the news, we're aware of atrocities in Ukraine and Africa, and so many nations are at war today still. I mean, I'm not sure there's ever been a time in history where there wasn't a war going on somewhere. It's just that social media now connects us with the world and the world news, like they just play it every single day. So, it's kind of this moment where it's almost like we're at a place in history where we have to choose love. We have to choose how we spend our time, what we listen to, what we let into our world, because all of those things affect our mental health and how we're able to show up in love. Or are we going to show up in fear? Are we going to think the future looks dire and dim and dark? Or are we going to choose to look at the future with hope and, compassion? And like you were saying, Brendan, like your generation is more compassionate, is more hope. Like the way you described your generation made me feel hopeful for the future, not dire at all, like, okay, maybe it's not as dire as he said it was earlier. Maybe there is potential for massive change, massive shift, massive amounts of love and compassion. And I feel like we are seeing that. I feel like even with all the bad news that they're putting on TV at night or on social media, you almost see the response to it as well. Like you're seeing it, Brendan, you're describing it, like people your age are more communicative, you're more open in discussing things, you're more tolerant of people, you're more compassionate, you're showing up for people differently, you're trying to protect your time and your own happiness and your own heart so that you can then show up that way for other people. I mean, that's just the natural next step of working on your own happiness and working on your own healing, is that you're able to then step into that for someone else. You can't give what you don't have. So if you are working on your own health and healing these generational traumas, and you're healing, the places where you did not see love modeled well, and you're able to talk about it and figure out, okay, how do we do this differently? We'll make mistakes along the way on that path, but we're still going to grow. We're always growing. We're always changing. Love is the fabric that holds the universe together, even our microscopic cells. So if that is true, and that's the place where we can find hope and resolve to be in that mindset, we can conquer any trauma we have. We can conquer any bad memory. We can rewrite our memories. Golly, the stuff going on in neuroscience today is fascinating, in the way that the power of the mind to go back and heal trauma and rewrite memories of your childhood that were painful. I've personally done this. It's fascinating. It's hopeful. It's exciting. And I feel like this is just a really great place to kind of cap off our conversation here on Loved. I really would be so pleased to end on a note of hope and joy and love. And I just want to thank you guys so much for being here, for being so vulnerable, being so honest and open, and sharing your lives with us and with, whoever might hear this podcast through the ages. I know that there are going to be people who listen who will be wrestling with something, and a piece of information that you shared will either help them think of something in a new way, or try a new, approach to a problem, or just know that they're not alone. So you guys have been invaluable to me. I treasure you both so much. I really, really appreciate you. But I do want to give you a second to say any last few words. They're just not allowed to be doomy, gloomy words, because I've already set the stage for ending on hope. So hate to put you in a box, but I'm gonna do it. No.
Is now we get to pop the champagne? Is that now? Is that now?
That's now.
Man.
Brendan, I do also want to give you a chance. I know you are on social media. If you would like to plug anything that you're working on, or how anyone can reach you, if you'd like to do that, I'll give you a moment to do that for sure.
Ayo. Oh yeah, I mean, I currently spend a lot of my time in school, going to Santa Monica College, studying business and marketing. But when I'm not sitting there working on 5 homework assignments, then I love to be creative with social media, things like YouTube, streaming, Twitch, maybe other outlets like TikTok or Instagram and stuff like that. But my handle is just the Brendan Diaz, pretty much like across everywhere. And
Awesome.
it's yeah, I'm a pretty kind of a fun kind of an energy. So
Definitely the
yeah, so that's
entertainer.
what
And
I
we'll,
enjoy doing.
we'll get your handle in the show notes and in the description. So, Mom, where
Let's
can
go.
people reach you? No, I'm just kidding. She's not reachable, people. She ain't coming to save you and fix your problems.
Where can I follow Jima?
Like,
Y'all
share.
know how to get a hold of me.
You're gonna have to go through me, people. Oh goodness, I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for just sharing incredible stuff today.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
for
us,
having us.
Charlene.
Thanks for joining the podcast.
This was lit. This was epic.
This
Fun.
was super fun.
And scene.
And
scene. And scene. Roll the credits.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share the love and buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/the Becoming Home podcast. And hey, if you want to connect with us, you can find Joe on Instagram at committing_2_change, or find the link in the description or the show notes.
Absolutely. And if you want to connect with my mom, Charlene, you can find her at fullyabundantlife.com, which will also be in the description and show notes. The Becoming Home podcast is a passion project to bring multi-generational perspectives to the hard topics that we face, becoming home for one another through vulnerability and respect. And we hope it has blessed you today.